Thank you very much for coming, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to be here. And I'm going to be talking to you, as implied, about the eating habits of politicians. And I'm going to start by telling you a story about Peter Mandelson. Some of you might have heard this story before. Buying a chip supper at a chippy in his constituency of Hartlepool, Peter Mandelson asked for haddock, chips and some of that guacamole. Clearly the guacamole in question was mushy peas, which the Metropolitan Mandelson mistook for the eponymous avocado dip. Now the important thing about this story is that it is utterly untrue, but it's also eminently believable. The mistake was actually made by a young American student who was helping Labour out at that by-election. Mandelson, despite being comfortably middle class, has certainly come across fish, chips and mushy peas before. But the thing is about the story is that it so utterly fits his character that it doesn't really matter whether it's true or not. The origin of the story comes from mischief-making on the part of two different politicians, either Neil Kinnock or John Prescott, depending on who you believe. Most sources do point to Kinnock, but I'd like to think it was Prescott, who had a turbulent relationship with Mandelson, not least when he compared him to a crab during the 1979 election campaign. And I'm not entirely sure why, but John Prescott gets presented by a Chinese mitten crab in a jar of water, and he holds up the crab to the cameras and he tells journalists, "Do you know what his name is? He's called Peter. Do you think you'll get the executive, Peter?" I still don't really know where the continuing political appeal of a photo shoot with crabs comes from, but there's a number of pictures of politicians holding crabs and other crustaceans. Now, Peter Mandelson's not the only politician to fall afoul of fish and chips. Tony Blair's tastes in food become more and more proletarian the closer he ascends in the corridors of power. There's Tony eating some chips. Now, the Daily Telegraph reports that in the Islington cookbook, which he contributed a recipe to in 1993, he divulged his favourite treat. His favourite meal was fettuccine, olive oil and some dried tomatoes and capers. But by the time Tony's Prime Minister, his taste buds have changed and he announces his favourite dish is good old-fashioned fish and chips. Now, one anecdote that's frequently bandied about is that Margaret Thatcher invented Mr. Whippy ice cream. The process of making Mr. Whippy involves reducing the amount of milk involved in production of the ice cream, which seems wholly in character with Maggie's desire to remove milk from people by any means necessary. In her early days, Margaret Thatcher is one of the few prime ministers ever to have a science degree. She graduated as chemist and worked for Lyons, a company that made the compressed gas that would produce Mr. Whippy. But actually, Mr. Whippy ice cream originated in America about 10 years before Thatcher ever worked at Lyons. Now, this was so much of a debate that the Royal Society actually weighed in after Thatcher's death to the Mr. Whippy debate, and said an oft-told anecdote in British left circles associates Thatcher with the invention of soft ice cream, which added air, lowered quality and raised profits. There is no firm evidence that Thatcher directly assisted in its invention. So she may not have indulged in ice cream, but we know quite a lot about Thatcher's diet, namely the bizarre lengths she went to when fighting the 1979 election. It's well documented that she only had 3 hours of sleep a night, but what's not so commonly mentioned is that this was coupled with a diet that featured no fewer than 28 eggs a week.
Oh, God.
Now, we know this because of the 30-year rule. After 30 years, political papers become unclassified, and one of the ones that wasn't perhaps the most notable politically is this incredible diet. There's one day, I think it's Wednesday, when she eats eggs on breakfast and lunch and dinner. 28 eggs. The only respite from this grapefruit and otherwise black coffee, steak and lettuce diet is that down there she's written whiskey with the meat. I'm going to return to ice cream because one of the things I've discovered into my researches on the eating habits of politicians is that politicians bloody love ice cream. Here's Tony and Gordon. There's loads and loads of pictures of politicians eating ice cream, but this is one of my favourite because firstly it sums them up. There's Tony, he's looking relaxed, he's not even wearing a tie, he's got his button undone. Gordy is in his black suit that he always wore, and they're looking like they're the best of pals. And this photograph was taken when they hated each other more than any other point in their lives. There's Blair's spin doctor describes it. Jonathan Powell says, Blair strolled over to an ice cream van to buy a couple of 99s. "Here, Gordon," he said, watching the pictures on television. Jonathan Powell, Tony's chief of staff, wanted to throw up. The head of the civil service said, "I don't think Blair was much of an ice cream person, and Brown certainly wasn't." But nevertheless, this is seen as a great photo opportunity. Let's, together, eating ice cream, like the fish and chips, a good old-fashioned British treat. Here's another politician eating ice cream. They picked the wrong Miliband. I've got a slightly far-fetched theory, which is about how a banana affected the outcome of the 2010 election. Now, in 2009, Gordon Brown was in the doldrums, one of the most unpopular prime ministers since the war, and David Miliband was going around being touted as the bright young thing who could come in, give the Labour Party a new lease of life, and possibly even win the next election. It was the conference down in Brighton. It was 2009, and then all the papers are writing up Miliband as the bright young thing, and then he does this. He walks along Brighton seafront, flailing a banana, which is clearly what you do if you're leadership material. No one will ever know why, but essentially doing this ruled him out of the leadership race. The 2010 election happened, and the rest is history. Gordon Brown is no stranger to bananas. Whilst he was Prime Minister, he was offended by the fact that newspaper cartoons always drew him as a fat man. And Gordon Brown wasn't particularly fat. He was very tall. He's about 6'2". But he did used to compulsively eat Kit Kats. He ate Kit Kats all the time. And in order to try and lose some weight, he shifted to bananas. He was eating 9 bananas a day, according to sources. That's 63 bananas a week. I'm just going to leave you that fact because that's astonishing. But I don't know if he still does it. But now, no discussion of the eating habits of politicians would sadly be complete without talking about Ed Miliband and the bacon sandwich. Oh. Although it makes me sad to even look at it. Did this lose Labour the election? Their own investigation into why they lost in 2015 suggests this is partly responsible. It's a 70-page report, of which 2 pages of which are headed "The Bacon Sandwich Incident." As in, it certainly struck terror into the political class, so much that shortly afterwards David Cameron became the first person ever to try and eat a hot dog with a knife and fork. That's a determination not to be photographed awkwardly with food, despite the fact that we've seen it, we know David Cameron can eat a hot dog. Now, although this is principally about the eating habits of politicians, I'm just going to take a very quick detour through, I've missed one, through the drinking habits of politicians. In Tony Blair's remarkable novel, A Journey, he confesses to developing a drinking problem during his time at Number 10. Sometimes he'd have a whiskey or a gin and tonic before dinner, a couple of glasses of wine with dinner. Now, I think if this is the gauge Tony is using to judge what a drinking problem is, then I think a great deal of the nation also suffers from some kind of drinking problem, one kind of another. The interesting thing about politicians and drinking is that there is only one time in the political year when you're allowed to have a drink in the House of Commons, and that is if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer and you're delivering the budget. As it stands, the last person to drink an alcoholic drink in the Commons chamber was Ken Clarke in 1996 as Major's last Chancellor, because since then, Gordon Brown, Alistair Darling, George Osborne and Phil Hammond have all just drunk water. So it could be, I don't know who will, I keep meaning to email John McDonnell and ask him if he would have a drink. Nobody, I suspect, will ever be as daring as Gladstone, who used to announce the state of the nation's finances while sipping a glass of sherry and beaten egg. Now, here is probably the most famous politician to enjoy a wee drink or 8. Here he is, the 3-time leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage, rarely seen without a pint of bitter and a cigarette in his hand. He actually did give up smoking for a bit, but he took it up again during the EU referendum campaign, claiming that he didn't believe it was bad for you. Now, I know Michael Gove has a lot to say about ignoring what experts have to say, but that's taking it to another level entirely. The Financial Times reports that over a lunch interview, Farage orders up 6 pints of ale, a bottle of wine and 2 large ports, and then kicks off when his interviewer goes for goat's cheese rather than lamb chops. What, they shouldn't serve rubbish like that in here? Goat's cheese? You can't give him bloody goat's cheese. But given this considerable bar tabs for a lunch meeting, and presumably afterwards Farage goes back to work, or whatever it is he does, suggests that maybe his potential pint is less of a publicity stunt and more of necessity. But what about our current crop of party leaders? Politics is moving so fast that I'm not currently sure whether Vince Cable is leader of the Liberal Democrats, let alone if he's recently indulged in a pie-eating contest. But as somebody who maintains a healthy interest in the eating habits of politicians, I was delighted that our Prime Minister allowed herself to be pictured eating chips in a manner that suggests she's never seen a chip before, and is utterly bewildered and disgusted by the concept of these fried sticks of potato. Ed Miliband, newly sassy Ed Miliband, spots another political party leader in a eating trouble, and suggests maybe they should have a bit of a chat about it. Theresa May, we learn from the Daily Mail, her favourite food is curry, and here she is eating some curry, and this actually turned out to be a little bit awkward because as Home Secretary in her constituency of Maidenhead, this is one of the 2 Indian restaurants that she cut the ribbon of, opened gleefully, and was delighted to support these Indian restaurants, only for the restaurants to be shut down by her own border agency and some of the staff deported. And sadly, Theresa May's love of curry is not shared by the UK border agency. Here's a picture of Corbyn with a giant marrow. A bit like trying to track down his policies on Europe, it's hard to find too many eating facts out about Jeremy Corbyn. He's a vegetarian, which means the most recent election was fought by more vegetarian party leaders than any election in history. Tim Farron is also a vegetarian. Lib Dem hacks describe his eating habits as a rubber tofu circuit. And Caroline Lucas, co-leader of the Green Party, is also a vegetarian. 3 years ago, at the Labour Party conference in Brighton, Corbyn was spotted in Bombay Aloo having the happy hour £3.50 all-you-can-eat vegetarian curry. Possibly as a result of austerity, happy hour price is now £5.50, and he hasn't been spotted in there since. Here's Corbyn with a bottle of Iron Brew. His attempts to court the Labour vote in Scotland were summed up by having a can of Iron Brew thrust into his hands by an eager journalist, and he'd never tasted Iron Brew and he wasn't about to start. Fortunately, for the sake of the eating habits of politicians, Kezia Dugdale, then leader of the Scottish Labour Party, not a particularly enviable position at the moment, managed to actually persuade him to drink some Iron Brew on the train journey home. It's he got a seat this time, and he drinks some Iron Brew and describes it as like nothing I've ever tasted. Now, one thing I'm often asked about the eating habits of politicians, presumably because he's such a grotesque caricature of a human that you'd expect him to have alarmingly freaky eating habits, is the eating habits of Boris Johnson. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. So I dived into the archives and found out this is the breakfast menu of Boris Johnson. He's one of the few politicians who manages to fit in a 3-course meal before he heads into the corridors of power. First course, quite normal, coffee and marmalade on toast. He does note that he substitutes butter for I can't believe it's not butter, which in my eyes is Philistinism, but it's up to you, that's fine. After that, things get a bit weird. Here's a picture of Boris holding a giant fish. After the toast and marmalade, he wanders around the kitchen reading the newspapers and eats some cold spaghetti or a chop or two. Okay, fine. And then before setting off to work, there's one more part of breakfast still to come. He claims there's often birthday cakes in the fridge which I'll eat for breakfast. So he washes down the toast and marmalade, the cold spaghetti, the coffee, the chop or two with birthday. What sort of household frequently has birthday cakes in the fridge? He was, I know he's recently split with his wife, but there's 4 people in that household. How many birthdays do they have? Why is there always cake in the fridge? One thing politicians are all often asked about is the price of a pint of milk. And Tim Farron, former leader of the Liberal Democrats, keen to avoid being caught out by this trap, arranged a whole photo shoot of him holding milk. Here we have Tim Farron holding some skimmed milk. And he got more. And more. And there's so many photographs of Tim Farron holding milk that I'm astonished the Liberal Democrats have allowed this to sort of stay online. He's not the leader anymore, but there's the availability of so much Farron milk photo shoots. This being down to earth thing is a big thing. Like Gordon Brown fell afoul of Mumsnet because he couldn't tell them what his favourite biscuit is and had to issue a panic press release the next morning saying anything with chocolate on it. Mumsnet now ask every single politician they get to interview what their favourite biscuit is. Andy Burnham is possibly my favourite, who refused to play by the rules and said his favourite biscuit was pie, chips and gravy. Clearly learning from Tony Blair. But it's strange, politicians are under an incredible amount of pressure. John Prescott admitted to having an eating disorder and was met with a strange mix of sympathy and mockery. And the mockery is utterly unjustified. But reports of the way he went about eating are somewhat eye-opening. He said I could sup a whole tin of carnation condensed milk just for the taste, stupid things like that. Marks and Spencer's trifles, I still love them, one of my favourites. Whenever I go to Mr. Chu's in Hull, my favourite Chinese restaurant in the world, I could eat my way through the entire menu. And this is a politician who's been mocked for being fat, for being, uncultured and all these things. And nobody really was prepared to take this very, very frank admission of an eating disorder seriously from John Prescott, which I think is very sad. Although the other thing that does make me wonder is that I looked up the menu for Mr. Chu's in Hull, and they've got over 75 dishes. And I'm just astonished. Like, it's very brave of Prescott to come and announce that he hasn't got an eating disorder and that it is a problem. But surely the Deputy Prime Minister eating 75 dishes at a Chinese restaurant would have made the papers at some point. I'm not sure. Some politicians stoop to much lower levels. Here's John Gummer, at the height of the BSE crisis, making his 4-year-old daughter eat a beef burger. My brother actually used to work with Cordelia Gummer, and I'm glad to say she survived into adulthood. But she's unimpressed. Everyone else was unimpressed, and Gummer's career never recovered. It's difficult for politicians. You try to present yourself as a man of the people. Here's Ed Miliband, Rachel Reeves and Ed Balls getting some sausage rolls from Greggs. And I'd never have thought I'd sort of see a headline on the BBC going, Ed Miliband and Ed Balls popped to Greggs for some sausage rolls. And wonder how this is obviously the pasty tax, how this has got to the top of the news schedule. You've got to enjoy pasties from Greggs as much as the next man, but you're working an 18+ hour day in front of a savage and crazy news cycle. You barely have time to see your family. You're pilloried for not knowing the price of a pint of milk. Here's George Osborne eats an expensive burger. George Osborne was pilloried for this. This burger cost him £6.75. He works in Whitehall. I don't know quite how long he's got to go and pop out and price up the cheapest burgers. But, there's a lot of things you can criticise about George Osborne, but not eating a £6.75 burger. Go for it, George. Have the burger. Just stop it with the policies. You need to be everything to everyone. You need to shovel down fish and chips with mushy peas, not guacamole, 1 minute, and serve up bruschetta the next. And that's pretty much it. I mean, there's just a really quick roundup, because although this is pretty much all about British politicians, it's worth just some highlights from their counterparts overseas. I'm trying not to think about the horrors that the President of the USA eats. I've lost my version of this. I'm just going to have to quickly look at it. Somebody leaked the menu. This is his rider from when he went to Saudi Arabia, and it includes, what's my favourite thing, 3 gallons of buttermilk, 5 maps of the 2016 Electoral College victory framed and hung throughout suite, 28 raw eggs, 6 boxes double stuffed Oreos unwrapped, stacked in rows of 8, 3 microwave ovens. Do not plug in microwaves, we will do this. And this is actually because the various officials thought Obama was spying on them through their microwave. There's so many horrible things on this. I wish I could give you handouts for it, but I'm not judging. They want you to unwrap the Kraft cheese singles. And this is an ortolan bunting. Mitterrand, the great French reformer, the president, his final meal involved eating ortolan buntings. A tiny, tiny songbird. You're not supposed to eat it. It's very frowned on, even in the most adventurous French cuisines. It's drowned alive in brandy, cooked and eaten whole, bones and all. You cover yourself in a white napkin in order to eat an ortolan buntings, because people did not want God to see them eating these tiny songbirds. After Mitterrand ate the ortolan buntings, he didn't ever have another bite of food, and he died within 10 days. And just for a closing point, if you thought British politics was unusual for eating habits, Australia is once again leading the field. Here is former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott eating an onion like an apple. Does he not know what an onion is? Is this something he regularly does? It turns out yes! Turns out he keeps eating the onions! He's not Prime Minister of Australia anymore. In fact, there's been about 4 or 5 since him. I don't know, I still don't know why he does it, and I hope one day to bring this talk back here and bring you that answer. Thank you very much. There's just two things.
Yeah.
If anyone here is on Facebook, I've got a Facebook page called The Eating Habits of Politicians that posts the occasional new tidbit of eating habits of politicians facts. So do look that up. And I made these little politicians books a couple of years ago, and these ones are all like damaged, which is really annoying because I used the wrong sort of paper. So I'm flogging them off for £2 each, and if I sell 2.5, I can afford another beer. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. Any questions for Chris? Any need to know? On that list of Trumpian, because I couldn't quite see the.
I've actually got the original sheet here. Should we flip back to it?
Yeah. Is that?
Yeah. I did print it out, but it's not on this current list. It's horrible. I mean, it's fair enough. Maybe that's just what they eat in America.
4 packs of Red Bull.
Peeled hard-boiled eggs, shoehorns, 3 shoehorns for 1 hotel suite. Because you all need to horn your shoe off at the same time. Anyway, sorry, any questions? You can stare at that.
I was just going to say, my lovely Kate has a thing about Trump.
Oh, well, I'm American, and I did read that he eats an awful lot of food from McDonald's, and he has his people go out and get it because he's dreadfully afraid of being poisoned.
So they have to keep it under their hat as to who the
So they have
food's
to run
for.
out, they don't know, they don't have anything to do with Trump, and they get McDonald's and they bring it back in. So
Yeah.
he eats McDonald's Big Macs or something equally horrible.
Yeah. You know, the Big Mac's the universal burger. It crosses the political divide. And there was a motion at Labour Party conference from one of the more wild-eyed momentum wings that wanted to nationalise Greggs. And there's now a Twitter account trying to nationalise Greggs. And I think the railways is one thing. I'm intrigued as to how Greggs would be nationalised. But it is, is it a natural monopoly? What about Pret?
Yes.
How will it work? But I do like the idea that he's going to send out undercover people to go and get them burgers.
Yeah, question. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to know if any pizza companies have the Westminster Parliament on their delivery.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I imagine a lot of I've never been to the House of Commons. There's another Twitter account which is the House of Commons. People taking pictures of the foodstuffs on offer in the House of Commons, and maybe that's just interesting for my own particularly niche interests, but it's always good to see. I'm sure that actually when the financial crisis was kicking off, and so Gordon Brown was the Prime Minister, Alistair Darling was the Chancellor. They had the Bank of England. They spent £700 on curry, which, to be fair, they've got all these people coming in desperately trying to do some action very fast. And they have this enormous, and they're just sitting there spooning curry and desperately trying to stop the markets from crashing. And there's a great story, because at about 5 o'clock, about 3 o'clock, Alistair Darling's like, Gordon, you've been awake for 48 hours, go and get some sleep. And of course, Gordon lives in number 10 upstairs, Alistair lives in number 11 upstairs, and downstairs are all the offices. So Alistair has another couple of hours with the head of the Bank of England, and they come up with something they think that would work before the markets launch. And so Alistair's like, well, I better go and wake Gordy up to go and get him to sign off on this. And so he's like scrambling upstairs in number 10 in the dark, trying not to wake up Sarah Brown and the kids, and trips over something. And Sarah's like, if you do not go back to bed this instant, thinking it's one of their children. And it's like, sorry, Sarah, it's the Chancellor here. I just need to get Gordon Brown to sign off on the bank bailout. But yeah, lots of takeaway curry. I presume, I reckon you do a good old business delivering to Parliament.
The takeout curry is obviously very good for the eyebrows, isn't it?
It does seem to have kept
Specialises the eyebrows.
And did you have a question? Sorry, because I saw your hand up.
Yes, I'd love to know what Alistair Campbell.
Oh, Alistair Campbell. I have read his diaries.
I wonder.
Yes. I can't remember. I've not, to be honest, I've not read his detailed diaries. I just read the overview of Alistair Campbell's diary. What do you suggest he was eating? Slime?
I think he probably eats frogs and geckos and snails and anything very reptilian or slimy.
If I had the lizard evidence, then this would probably be a centrepiece of my talk. I'd love to know more about the eating habits of Alistair Campbell. I will go through his diaries and I'll get back to you on that as well.
Any?
How did you get this anyway?
Oh, how did I get this? Somebody leaked it. I wasn't sneaking around in the Saudi Arabia Hilton. Somebody, one of Trump's staff, leaked it.
And that's May 72, it's about a year ago.
Yeah.
12 loaves of sliced white bread somewhere down there. So that's,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people are eating this stuff. It's mostly the 3 gallons of buttermilk. That's 24 pints of buttermilk. That's
Hungry man fried chicken dinners.
yeah. I think there's those things that you microwave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice, excellent.
Any more questions?
Any final questions for Chris before we take a break? Okay, in which case, can we thank Chris again for a brilliant talk?